All right. So we're, oh, no. Jinx on you.
Never mind. You just blew my whole Friday the 13th thing.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax. HIPAA help is on the way.
Welcome to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast. My name is David Sims of HIPAA for MSPs and Security First IT. Joining me is Donna Grindle from Cardin. What's going on?
Yeah.
the compliance company formerly known. I'm going to make that stick one day.
Oh, no. I don't know what we're going to do with this. But it's easier. It's easier. It takes less room on a card or a note. So,
True.
Yes.
True.
How are you, Mr. Sims?
I am doing quite well as we record here. It is the lucky Friday the 13th. So, liking that. One of my favorite days of the year.
Mm-hmm. Well, when your job is to be paranoid every day, it means nothing for it to be Friday the 13th.
Well, as I like to tell people, I was born on Friday the 13th, so I'm immune to all the craziness.
You're like my brother. Yeah, he was born on Friday the 13th.
You compare me to him a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's probably a reason we get along in the strange way that we do. So anyhow,
Yes.
when this comes out, I will be on my way or about to head down to Savannah, Georgia. And I will have just returned from California. It was a great trip, I am sure.
You had a blast, didn't you?
Going back to my paranoia thing, I've been through tornadoes and hurricanes and tropical storms and dealt with fire and, all kinds of things. Never an earthquake.
Well, maybe you'll have one out there.
Well, they had one just recently, so I am paying attention.
Well, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll be one of those 120 stories up when it happens.
Swaying, yeah, you can see me now. You'll hear me. But I'm looking forward to Savannah because Savannah's one of my favorite places to hang out.
Yep. Down at the Riverwalk.
Yeah, because the hotel's at the Hyatt right there on River Street, so it'll be cool.
Yep.
And then in June, I am going up to Dalton to do their monthly seminar. I'm the featured problem of the North Georgia Medical Management Association, and they do occasionally have small earthquakes in West Georgia. In North Georgia, they do have occasional small ones. Generally, it just means a couple of lawn chairs fell over. They do feel it.
Yeah, we have them around here usually around the 4th of July. I don't know where these people get dynamite from, but
it's crazy.
I'm like, God.
And there you go. Now we know that's what it is in South Carolina.
I know. Well, we have a gold mine not far away from me. So,
well, I grew up in gold mine country.
Mm-hmm.
Dahlonega cited the first major gold rush in the United States, at least according to some. You always see somebody else is going to have the first major one. But anyhow.
Yeah, so we're kind of wrapping up. I guess the back office people are wrapping up everything with the boot camp we just had. Mm-hmm. So I guess now it's time to start pushing the next one, even though we don't have a date for it. But if you guys are interested in knowing about it, then head on over to thehippabootcamp.com.
Yeah, we already have like 4 or 5 people that are like wanting to know when the live one's going to be. So.
I know, yeah. So I guess our next one needs to be live.
Yep, it's going to be live. It'll be here in the ATL in the booming metropolis of Tucker, Georgia.
Yeah. So if you're interested in that, I would get your name in the pot because we do limit how many people come so that we can spend one-on-one time with you and help you out. So we don't want a huge group. So if you're interested in getting your name on the list, then I would certainly do that quickly.
Yeah, bring it on. All right. And you can give to us at Give.
Yeah. So we had several people over the last few months ask about, donating to the cause, helping to keep the lights on, paying for Donna's rehabilitation of dealing with me every week or whatever.
It's expensive therapy.
So anyway, we've set up a way that you could do that. One, we have a Patreon account And so if you want to set up something where it's a monthly donation, you can do that. Or if you just want to throw some a one-time donation and help out, then we'll do that too. Anyway, both of those can be found at helpmewithhipaa.com/give. And we certainly appreciate those who do support the podcast because it doesn't come free.
It does to you, but not to us.
Right. Yeah. It's a lot of time and money goes into producing it and putting it out there. And of course, if you're getting any kind of value from it at all, then you can reciprocate. We'd appreciate it.
Either do it by promoting us on social media or giving us some of the green stuff.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we can't pay the bills with the social media love, but
hey, it works out.
But yeah, we do what we can. Also, there's an app. We have an app for that. Head on over to either the iTunes store or the Google Play Store. You can get an app, Help Me With HIPAA app. Not only can you listen to the podcast, but we also have cool PDFs there with the show notes to help you with your training documentation. So you don't even have to document it. Just download it and use it.
We're trying to do it all for you.
I know. Can't get any easier than that.
All right. So oh, no. Jinx on you.
Oh, never mind. You just blew my whole Friday the 13th thing.
All right. What are we talking about today?
We're going to try to finish up a little hodgepodge of what we're doing about the annual HIPAA Summit. We started with, we're going to do it all in one podcast, then we couldn't. So then we're going to do it in two podcasts, and then kind of got a little excited and derailed at the same time last week with everything that was happening to kind of fit into the summit. So, but we never made it all the way through it. So we're going to finish it up and still some amazing stuff to talk about from that summit. So we want to just go ahead and dive straight into that.
Yeah. It's stuff that actually made both of us go, never thought of that before.
Nah, never.
I know. So the first, we're actually going to put together physicians and security officers. That's what this one is.
They don't go in the
Physicians and
same
security
room.
officers. I know, really. It's But there was a presentation by Laura Hoffman, who is the Assistant Director of Federal Affairs for the American Medical Association, the AMA. And, they're the organization for physicians. They did a survey because they were, they wanted to understand what physicians understood and believed about cybersecurity, where their concerns were, how they wanted help with it. So it was a really cool, it's a patient safety issue that we talked about before. Mm-hmm. They are the ones that are driving it. Their cybersecurity presentation was cybersecurity, a patient safety issue.
Good.
Yeah. So they're bringing it on too. And they did a ton of interviews and surveys and literature. It was a pretty extensive process that they went through to get this information. And so there were some interesting things. One of the points was, we always say presentations, everything. And we've had our podcast where we talked about talking to your boss about HIPAA and how you frame it and what you talk about. And all these people that run around talking about fines and investigations and all of this kind of stuff, mm-hmm. It just really doesn't resonate with anybody. It just doesn't. Unless somebody has had that happen, that doesn't resonate. What does resonate is almost anybody knows somebody that got hit with ransomware.
Right.
Almost anybody knows somebody that had identity theft issues. And, their business is impacted by these things. And that's what you need to focus on. So the funny thing was, when they were interviewing them about these surveys, the privacy and security practices, if you asked them if they should do an SRA, a security risk analysis, mm-hmm. they were like totally against having to put in that effort. Mm-hmm. But if you ask them, should they identify where their PHI is, the actual steps, they were like, oh, yeah.
Oh, gosh.
We need to do that. She says, funny, if you say the concepts, they understand it. They say yes. But if you ask them this, they're like, no. So it's a misunderstanding. There's a miscommunication, and it just is clear.
It's a marketing issue.
Yeah, all of it is. So, the conversation itself needs to be changing, and it needs to be that it is about patient safety.
Mm-hmm.
And the AMA has said it over. She probably said it 10 times in her little presentation. So they're really driving that message. And also is the terms that everybody's heard over and over, we've got to have a different way to quantify that so that it's clearly means something. An SRA clearly is something that's a negative thing, but the actual process of the SRA, they're all about because they don't understand what one is. The one just means bad, and somebody's making me do it.
Right.
So it's the changing the national conversation was a big point of this. Well, at least of their findings is that is really needed because. The historical approach, that's the technical folks and the nerds worry about it and they focus on checking the boxes.
Right.
And we've told you for a while, it ain't about checking no boxes no more.
Mm-mm. No. Well, I'm glad they're finally pulling in, everybody because, cybersecurity, compliance, whatever you want to call it, it's the job of the entire organization. And I think it gets thrown, especially when you start talking about security or cybersecurity, it just all gets thrown into the IT bucket. Oh, that's IT's problem. And it's not.
And it's not.
I beat you on that
one. Boy, we're in sync today. That's scary. But, when we explain this, when we're working with our clients and we're like, okay, there's privacy, breach notification requirements. If you're a covered entity, they're different than if you're a business associate, but you have them. They understand that that's not a technical thing. But everything under the security rule is a technical thing and because it's security. No, actually, it's not. There's administrative requirements, technical requirements, and physical requirements. And it's amazing once you speak a language they get, and we try multiple ways until we find what resonates to be able to get on a common ground in how we're talking about it. So yes, it's changing that common language to reinforce. It is not a technical issue. It's a patient safety issue. I told you they're taking our name. And then they also pointed out in that process of being able to create common language and all these things is the need for cyber frameworks. And I'm a big proponent of the National Cybersecurity Framework. I think there's a lot of value in merging that with HIPAA. And that's what we actually are on the path of doing. I was explaining that to a client that, this National Cybersecurity Framework thing's over here and we're starting to integrate that in. Well, I don't want to do things that I don't need to do.
Who does, right?
I was like, don't worry. What we're doing is building the framework. So imagine this. You're building a house and right now you want to put another bathroom in and a bedroom over in that corner, but you're not going to do it right now. That's going to be your mother-in-law's suite. But you go ahead and put the framework in and the plumbing in knowing that's what you're going to do. That's what we're doing. So and that's what we all need to be doing now is to say it's status quo is not going to work anymore. No. And that whole reasonable and appropriate, the one thing that the AMA is pushing, and I don't know how I feel about it, but so they are suggesting, and it's anybody, if you got an idea, throw it out there because we need to discuss these things. I'm all about it. They are suggesting that if we have a framework that is defined and that the physician's obligation applies, that if you meet this framework requirements, then you're exempt from random HIPAA security audits. So my first thing is, how are you going to define that in a way that it doesn't become checkbox security?
Yeah.
Number one, because that's what, if you check those boxes, because I don't want this thing. But number two is all you're going to give up is random HIPAA security audits. that's so statistically low, it would be fine.
That's
so if you could define,
that's why they're going to do it, because they're like, oh, this sounds great, but it really doesn't do anything.
yeah, but if you could properly define the first part, not having a random audit or making, some sort of a give on the random audit to say, if you can show me all of these things, it'll be less painful. Because if you were actually doing that framework and you got requested for an audit, it would be easy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing of how they're doing it. Everybody's scared of these random audits, and to me, I'm like, that's the least of your worries.
Yeah.
Understanding the physician's perspective and act to help protect patient safety is one of their things that they think that we should do, that industry and government needs to understand the physician's perspective better and why they struggle with security.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the part where I said, David, you got to see this stat.
Yeah, I know.
So how is the 20% of small practices have internal security officers, leading to heavy reliance on health IT vendors for security support. More than 1 in 3 physicians of all practice sizes obtain training from their health IT vendor.
Personally, I think 20% is way too high.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's high in that that they lean heavily on IT vendors. That number is probably a lot higher of those who are leaning on the IT vendor. I think what's low is that I don't think that they have a well-defined security officer. Most of the time, they don't have one at all, or they have.
Most of the time, it's like the 4th or 5th thing on their job list.
Yeah, but if you ask them, who's your security officer? Well, I don't know. I don't know who it is. I guess it's so and so over here. And then when you talk to her, she's like, "Well, I did help do the policies and procedures about 5 years ago." Well, okay. Well, what have you done since then? Nothing. So not really a security officer. And then when you look at 1 in 3 physicians of all practice sizes obtain their training from the healthcare IT vendor, I would say they probably obtain it, but they don't go through it.
Yeah, we know about that, don't we?
So, buying it is great, but using it is kind of what we're wanting you to do here.
Well, and I think the key here is it's the physician's perspective.
Right.
And there are times when you can ask the physician a question and they answer it, and that's not right. It's their perspective. They think these things are happening properly in their practices, and they're not.
I have a great example of that where I had a recent conversation with the physician and the practice manager, who happened to be the physician's wife, which happens a lot in some of the smaller practices. And he was basically saying, "Look, we've got this covered. We don't need X, Y, and Z." and the wife was like, "No, we don't have this covered. And yes, we do need X, Y, and Z. We are not as good as you think we are in this area." And he's like, "What?" But that perfectly explains it.
Yeah, and so that is a key element there that I don't think the AMA wouldn't even know it, because they're surveying the physicians. And I know many, many physicians that will tell you, I just want to treat my patients.
And they should.
Yeah. And that's those are the ones I like working with, because that's where their commitment is. And that, again, is what we're worried about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if they think they want to run the business, it's not better, because often there's more confusion that takes place. But it's having them sit down and listen in a meeting and understand where you are with these things. And when we do our analysis and we give them that report, almost every time, the first time, it's covered in red.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wah, wah, wah. And, their grade is not even, these are not people that like to get C's and D's.
Mm-hmm.
And at least usually. So it's an eye opener for them. They're like, tell me why this is. And then we'll say, well, we found out, blah, blah, blah. And they'll look at their staff. Is that true? Yeah. They just don't understand the depth of the problem. We have HIPAA covered. I'm sure we do.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to if you don't understand what a security risk analysis is, then how can you move beyond that?
Right. It is a communication issue primarily.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the bottom line is when I look at it, I see a communication issue. No matter how you slice it, there's a disconnect between what a security risk analysis is and what it actually entails doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't get those two. And that's not just physicians. I mean, there's a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, I know from IT, from our side, we love super cool wording and acronyms and all that, which doesn't help the issue at all.
Well, you know, we do a whole, there's a reason we do a session in the boot camp about making sure part of the solution to a proper cybersecurity program is to make it where IT and everybody else learns to work together.
Mm-hmm.
And the communication and all those things are key elements. And using a language, it doesn't have to be the same language, just one they agree on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of like, you know, when you have maybe German and French sit down, they speak English.
I know, but it's,
you know,
I mean, I've seen, you know, meetings where the IT person walks in and they're like, we just want to let you know we helped with you with your SRA, and we found out that your UTM had a VPN set up and the SHA-2 wasn't activated properly. But we did find out that you were running the correct encryption process, except for the fact that it had some old blowfish on it, so we had to remove that. And I'm like, oh my God, dude. Nobody knows what you said.
It's absolutely right. So, you know, and that just carries into the survey and what the findings of the survey, when they said to the physicians, what concerns you most about future attacks? And their responses, they could pick up to 5 things. So, you know, you don't get 100%, but you do get to see the ones who selected these big items. So the top 3 things they're concerned about: interruption. They say interruption. I'm going to vote for it was leaning more towards inconvenience.
Yeah.
To our daily business, including loss of access to records. And so, you know, either way, that's like number 1. Tied with that is EHR security, including compromised patient data. Okay, well, you know, not having access to records, that's talking about availability.
Mm-hmm.
Compromise is integrity. And it doesn't really touch on further specifics about confidentiality, but their next thing is patient safety concerns, which one could say that kind of loops the confidentiality in there because we've established this is about patient safety.
Mm-hmm.
And those are their top 3 concerns. Well, that's great. And I mean, they are statistically very high compared to everything else. In fact, the patient safety is at 53%, the other 2 at 74%, and the closest one to them below there is at 36%, which is civil or criminal liability. So they're worried about the liability. They're not worried about the fines and those kind of things as much because that falls down way at the bottom. But
yeah, but
costs.
I disagree with this. They worry more about the cost. When I'm having the conversation with them, that's at the top.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, it goes right to the top. It blows right by everything else, right? So the cost, but the examples of the cost they're worried about is ransom amounts or what it costs them to provide credit monitoring to patients. And, you know, that to me right there, when you offer the credit monitoring, statistically from the credit monitoring people, they tell us that there's a very low statistical likelihood that somebody will sign up. In most cases at this point, because they've already signed up with somebody else, you know, from another data breach. But it's not like every single person is going to sign up for that. They just think it is.
Right.
The loss of billing they worry about, which is
I would too.
You know, that goes with the money. and then the fines and all those things. But here at the last bottom part. Now, the good news is the 0% was none of the above. So that means everybody surveyed really worries about some of this. That, there's I don't worry about any of that. But the last two, David.
Yeah.
I can't even say it.
Just bang my head against the wall. So medical device security is next to the bottom.
19%.
And then at a whopping 6%, not having a backup of your records. They don't care.
Well, it's just not their concern. Again, they think that's handled.
Yeah.
They think they got that. But that goes back to the SRA. They don't know where all that PHI is.
Mm-hmm. And the medical device security, they probably don't understand the criticality of that. Like, what does that mean if it's not secure or if it gets compromised?
Yeah. Which is a perfect segue into, you got all the physicians saying that, and then you switch over and you do the security officer discussion panel.
Oh, that had to be a good one.
Well, I was happy. But what was one of their top concerns? The people that are doing the security, top concerns, one of them was medical device security.
That was at the bottom of the other list.
Yeah. And it's again, it's a miscommunication or a disconnect in understanding what that really means.
Or I wonder if it's because the physicians kind of throw the responsibility on, the security officers, and they go, I'm not concerned. It's not my problem. It's the security officer's problem.
Yeah. But you should be worried about it. But they're saying, well, what are you really worried about? Well, that's not going to happen to us. But when they were talking about the kinds of things, and people don't get it, I don't think,
No, they don't.
That what these medical devices mean, and when they're going through, well, if they hack into these machines, which we've already established repeatedly, that security is not a priority on these machines from a technology standpoint.
Mm-mm.
It's the functionality and the things that it can do. But if it needs to connect to the network, they're not worrying about that security so much.
Right.
And, we talk about patching and all of that kind of stuff. Who's patching the medical devices? Nobody.
Mm-hmm.
They're running software, But when they were talking about somebody hacking in and being able to change the test results from a device, just imagine that they either show that something's happening that's not and causing treatment to occur that's not necessary, or they change it so that something that is there is not there. And now you don't get treated for something that you need to be.
That sounds like a patient safety issue.
That does. It does. And then the terrifying one.
I know this one was the one I had to read a couple times. I was like, dog.
You just don't even think about it. Is that they hack into an MRI and they make it stop moving and churn out too much radiation on a patient. Or they just make it seem like it's normal, but it's churning out too much radiation all the time. And it just kind of freaked me out just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Just a dish.
It's like MRI and a tanning bed all in one.
Oh, God. Help me. But then they go into it and take it a step further of how this is a patient safety issue. So we have this MRI and it gets hacked, and either it quits working or it burns you up or whatever, or you can't trust the test results. But those things are not, you get into a rural area, there's one of those. Even here in Atlanta, my cousin's son has some issues and he has to have a specific type of MRI done because of what's going on with him. And they had to move him. Now, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta is not a small entity. They have multiple hospitals. But because of his needs, they had to move him to a different hospital just to do this one test because it's that specific. Well, you can imagine in a rural area how often that might happen. Now, granted, his is a very different scenario. But even in Atlanta, they have to move him. We wouldn't even expect that capability in some of these rural areas. Well, if you have one of those machines in a 100-mile radius and that machine goes down or it gets locked by ransomware or you can't trust the test, now what do you do? That's a major patient safety issue.
Mm-hmm.
And these devices are not up to date. I can assure you, we know this. We spend a lot of time making sure that IT folks have them segmented off in a little world all to themselves, and they can't really talk to people unless they absolutely have to, because they're that bad. So now that I've terrified David to the point he's curled up in a little embryo position.
I'm not getting an MRI. If it stops moving, I'll be like jumping out of the machine.
Yeah, I can see you now. But, they're starting NIST. We talk about them all the time, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. And they had done a whole thing on how to secure the pumps, the infusion pumps.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that because there was a lot of concern about them not being secured. So they did an entire study and came up with best practices and those kind of things just on that one device. Well, now they're starting a project on PACS systems, which is what lets you work with the images that come off of the MRIs and the radiology stuff. Just kind of know it's the patient management system of all of those things. It's a very generalized way of putting it, but that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And those things I've been saying forever. Let me just say, I know firsthand they're not secure. From just being involved in scenarios, there are many of them that are not secure at all. So they're really working on this whole device thing. And then they took it a step further to say, okay, had you ever put down, they were saying, have you put in your risk analysis that somebody hacks into the heating, ventilation, air conditioning system?
Yeah, no kidding. We've seen that happen.
Yeah, but that was the HVAC folks uploading a invoice to Target, and that's what led down the path of the big Target breach.
Mm-hmm.
But in this one, they're like, actively hack your HVAC system and then force computers to overheat, change patient care areas where it's too much heat or too much cold being pumped into the areas, and hold it for ransom. I'm not going to give you control of your environment unless you pay me X. Man, and if you think they're not heading down that path, I mean, that's just no.
Yeah, that's all Mr. Robot stuff. Like, he hacked into the battery backups and caused them to all overheat to the point where they were bombs. So they just all exploded.
Yeah, so it's the same concepts though, and I mean these people don't care that you're just at the other end of the computer to them, and they're assuming, hey, I've got, and so when you're a healthcare provider of any sort, and they can identify that, then that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, and all right, well now we got to say, is the heating and ventilation system connected to the network? And they were like, you have to make sure that you include all PHI in all forms and all locations in your planning, which is a security risk analysis.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it goes to, and we've talked about this before, segmenting those networks. Don't have everything on the same network. The only things that should be touching those machines that have PHI on them are the other business machines that need access to it. It's kind of like the same uses and disclosures that you do for your personnel. You should do it for your machines.
Yeah, that's right. It's minimum uses and disclosures on your network.
Yep, exactly. We're going to have to trademark that.
There you go.
Electronic minimum uses and disclosures.
Well, used to you could say, well, this is a tiny little network. You don't have to worry about it. You can just let it be flat. That's what they call it when all the computers just they're all in their own post office.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it's like. They all have their own post office, all zip codes the same, and you can just toss anything out there and they'll all see it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that doesn't work that well anymore. because now there's so many other things sticking in on all of those networks. You need to segment them into their own zip codes.
Well,
so if they can talk to each other, they just have to have another layer of concern.
The problem, though, is what you just brought up. You said it doesn't work that way. Now, the problem is it does work that way. It just doesn't work that way. So when you have a conversation with somebody and they're like, well, everything's working, why do I need to do this?
Yeah, it does work really, really well.
But I like to tell people, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
That's right. That's like saying, I've got the bank has a lock on the front door, so they don't need to lock the vault.
Exactly.
It's the same thing. Well, there's a lock on the front door. We're good. Don't worry about locking that vault. Don't worry about locking those, so it is exactly the concept of the bank. You go in the front door and all the things that can happen there. But when you move into the vault, different things, different requirements. And then when you want to open your own safety deposit box, whole new world.
Mm-hmm.
That's what segmentation is.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, we're done now. All right, we've done our part. So other things that they covered, in this, one was very comforting to me, that they said, it was a continued discussion about vetting your business associates. And yes, they all are doing more on vetting their business associates, which was great to hear. The vendors don't like it, but it's the bottom line, and everybody's complaining, well, you shouldn't tell me I have to do this. We're not. We're telling you, do what's reasonable and appropriate. But if they screw you over, it's still your problem. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is, when they were asking about this, and one of the security officers mentioned, and these are CISOs and big organizations, and he said that an auditor came in and told him he had to read the SOC 2 reports of all the vendors. And we've talked about SOC reports, haven't we, Dave?
Oh, yes, we have.
And his attitude was the same. The only thing I want to see on there is what was wrong, because the rest of it means nothing to me. And I'm going to see what was wrong, and then I'll include that in the stuff I'm asking about.
Mm-hmm.
The SOC 2 report doesn't help me be sure I'm working with a vendor that has stuff under control.
No.
So go back and listen to our SOC 2 report episode for more details on why he said that. And I just like to say, yay.
Yeah, you have a little personal reason why.
Yeah, well, yay. I was right.
I was waiting on that. That's what I was waiting on.
Another conversation. Now, this is from a guy who was talking about, they were having conversations about machine learning, artificial intelligence, and all these kind of things. And this guy's got 2 different proposals sitting on his desk right now for over $500,000. And, we talk about we're a micro business. We don't, that's not a world we rotate in on a normal basis. I mean, we might do something with them, but we're not that $500,000 one project.
Mm-hmm.
So they're looking at a whole different level of things than we are. But what his point was clearly is that you must document your decision-making for the options you choose in technology and know that you will never be able to afford everything you need. So this guy who has those kinds of proposals that he gets to choose from, he knows he's never going to be able to afford everything he needs. Well, then if he's not gonna, then the rest of us aren't going to be able to do that. And so you document what your choices are and why you made your decisions, and you just know. And that's what we have to tell people all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go in and say, here's how you document that you chose me. Security first IT.
Or I'll help you document that.
IT.
.com.
And then they had a great conversation about EHR vendors and RCM vendors, which is, health record vendors and revenue cycle management vendors.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was something that was very interesting is why were they not considered covered entities like, other they should be classified as a clearinghouse. And there was a huge discussion about it because it would make them have further liabilities. Instead of being the business associate of these providers, they would have they would be a covered entity who is a business associate, which creates a separate liability and a separate layer of requirements.
Yeah.
So they would have direct liability, not secondary.
So what did they say about that? Because
Yeah.
I know the vendors weren't too happy about it.
Well, they weren't there. But there was a lot of discussion about this. So there's a lot of people thinking about this problem. So all you vendors out there, you need to be aware, they're thinking about this need to take any cloud EHR vendor or RCM vendor and say, okay, the requirements are for a clearinghouse says that they are a value-added networks and switches that does either of the functions. You process or facilitate processing of health information, receive from another entity, receives a standard transaction from another entity, and processes or facilitates it into a non-standard format. So, yes, that's kind of always been those clearinghouses that manage the transactions of healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
But what they're saying is that definition matches exactly to what cloud EHR vendors and RCM vendors are doing.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. And now you add to that, and I think what's really brought that discussion on is this ransomware debacle with Allscripts. And there's really no other way to describe that than a debacle. It was a mess. But, as they're keeping an eye on what happens with that deal, because the practices have the primary issue and Allscripts is secondary. So it's kind of like, I can push a little of that up. And if it were in this new definition, then it would be different. And the bottom line is, in the end of the discussion, it just said all that has to happen is for OCR to release some guidance that says, we believe X, Y, and Z makes an EHR and RCM business meet the definition of a clearinghouse. Boom, they're covered entities.
Ooh.
This doesn't require changes to the law or anything.
Right.
It just requires them to say, we have reassessed this under new functionality. Here it is.
Wow.
And you talk about, that would be a major shift. I know. It would be huge. And part of the discussion about why that needs to happen is that, there was that whole thing about, regulation, and we got to get rid of regulation. And the bottom line that everybody finally kind of agreed to is, healthcare is notoriously bad at policing itself.
Yeah.
And that's why there are so many regulations and other things that are coming out trying to, healthcare trying to regulate itself. There's a program that's called CAQH Core,
Mm-hmm.
which has some cool stuff in it, and High Trust. Well, both of those, you're buying things from them to meet those requirements. But it's this idea that it's formed by healthcare to police healthcare. And we all know that HIPAA was voluntary.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, when it was voluntary, they didn't take advantage of it then. So they're not self-policing.
Yeah.
If they were self-policing, we wouldn't be having help me with HIPAA.
Many people still think HIPAA is voluntary.
I know, really. No, they think it's optional. It's not even voluntary.
It's just optional.
I just choose not to participate. But the industry as a whole did not adhere to the voluntary programs. If you don't make it be part of a requirement, they're not going to do it.
Mm-mm.
And there's so many cases of that. And, some of them say, well, there's just so many requirements, I can't do anything that's not required. Okay, but you don't want the requirements. We take the requirements away, then what are you going to do? And therein lies the vicious loop, and the final point from the security officer's discussion was many people still do not do security by design in their process. It's not part of their culture like we always talk about. It's by accident.
It's not security first.
Yeah, it's holy crap, something happened.
Yeah.
That's the kind it is. And it's unfortunate, but, we're in a vicious cycle right now that, when we first started this podcast, we were begging people to listen to our message. And that's why we started the podcast, is to say, people, you really need to understand this is important. It's not somebody pushing you around trying to do stuff. It's things we need to do to protect patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there you go. Physicians, security officers clearly need some work on that connectivity.
Let's put you in a room. You can't come out until you get some stuff done.
Everybody always talks about that, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Never see it happen.
We're going to lock you in a room until you figure this out.
Yeah.
So
my mother did that, trying to make me and my sister stop fighting. I'm locking you in a room until you figure it out. And finally she says, stop fighting. I can't take it anymore.
I know. Well, you lock them in a room, they're going to fight.
Children.
But
sibling.
It sounds to me like a big part of it, though, is coming up with some commonality of communication first, and then maybe going down a list of what each side sees as being the important things that need to be addressed, and then kind of work your way from there.
Well, and we both understand, the likelihood, it's not commonality of communication. It's making sure that the tech people learn how to speak the language that everybody else understands. We're never, if they were going to learn the tech stuff, that would already happen.
Yep. But,
and we keep making up new crap.
But that's going to be tough, man. That's just like, we don't even want to talk in terms. We want to talk in acronyms. It's so much faster that way. And look at how people text. They text in acronyms.
Well, we have to start coming up with text messages about HIPAA security. Let's see what we can come up with.
Even you and I, we don't even call it Help Me with HIPAA. We send each other messages. It's like, HMWH.
HMWH. That's it. Well, that's a lot of words to type.
I know.
HMWH is faster than the podcast, saying the podcast.
I know.
All right, buddy.
All right.
I think we're done for now.
We are done. So if you made it this far, thank you very much. Please remember to follow us, share us out on your favorite social media site, rate us on our podcasting apps, and help us spread the word. Not like the way Donna spreads stuff. But anyway, always remember to send your questions and ideas in to contact@helpmewithhipaa.com. We promise you we'll read it. And I promise you Donna will respond to it.
Jeez.
Even you, Carla. She's always sliding stuff in there. So remember, for Donna and myself, and apparently everybody at OCR, it's not about compliance. It's about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.